Over recent years, I have realized just how deeply my own life has been shaped by sentences. Some of these sentences have come from the Bible. Some of these sentences have come from books that I've read. And some sentences have been spoken to me. One such sentence was spoken to me way back in 1978, and I've never forgotten it. I was interning in a small little ecumenical congregation in Washington, D.C. for 6 weeks. Church by the name of the Church of the Savior. The minister there was a wonderful man, Gordon Cosby, and he somehow, in his own way of being, modeled for me what it was like to be a pastor. And as I prepared myself to return to my own homeland, I asked him for a word. I've only asked 3 people in my life for a word. And many people have had words for me that I haven't asked for. And Gordon was quiet for a moment. And then he said to me in words that have stayed with me ever since then. He said to me, "Trevor, don't ever forget that every human being sits next to their own pool of tears." I begin with that anecdote because in the 4th and final week of the spiritual exercises, we ask for the grace to participate in the joyful consolation of the risen Lord. Ignatius was convinced that the main ministry of the risen Jesus in our lives is the ministry of consolation. When you think about it just for a moment, every time you read a resurrection story, one of the resurrection narratives, every time Jesus is consoling. And so in this final movement of the spiritual exercise journey, we seek to encounter the consoling Christ so that we too may participate in the ministry of consolation to others. And so just for a few moments, I want us to focus on one resurrection story, the encounter between the risen Jesus and Mary. And I wanted to shine some light on how this encounter with the risen Christ happens within the context of our own tears and the tears of others. I want to say, first of all, that we encounter the Christ who consoles us when we become willing to face our own tears. That's what Mary did. She's standing outside of the tomb weeping, and she hears this question coming first from the angels, then from the risen Lord. Why are you crying? Why are you weeping? And then she finds words to let her tears tell their story, to find their voice. She faces her tears. Her life had been devastated by two dark powers that continue to stain every human life. On the one hand, her life had been devastated by the dark power of death. On that terrible, terrible Friday, she had witnessed the death of the one who had loved her back to life. In that moment, her life was devastated. We too, in our own lives, know the reality of that dark power. We have our own griefs and our own losses of those special people in our lives who loved us into life. This power of death operates in many different other ways. Think of the slow death of a marriage, perhaps the sudden death of a business or a career. Think of that terrible deadness of spirit sometimes that can possess us, that can rob us of our responsiveness to life and to God and to others, and sometimes rob us of our responsiveness to the miracle of our own existence. We also know this dark power of death. And then on the other hand, Mary's life had been devastated by the dark power of evil. The dark power of evil operating through the structures, the political leadership structures of that day, and through the apathy, the terrible apathy of the crowd who allowed their institutions to sin on their behalf. And that dark power of evil crucified Christ. And we too know that dark power in our own lives. Some of us have known abuse, betrayal, exclusion, oppression. And tragically, sometimes we ourselves have been instruments of that dark power, as we have abused, excluded, rejected, and oppressed those around about us. Mary faces the tears caused by these two powers in her own life. And that can be a very hard thing for us to do. We often run from our tears. It's very hard sometimes for us to face our own heartache and heartbreak. We numb ourselves. Sometimes we self-medicate too much. We work compulsively. And sometimes we camouflage our own pain with anger and rage. The consequences are tragic. And rather than facing our own pain, we transmit it to those around about us. But most tragically of all, when we don't face our tears, we rob ourselves of the possibilities of an encounter with the Christ who consoles us. Maybe even in this moment, just in this moment, you may want to acknowledge your own tears right now. Let's go back to the story. Will you notice how Mary opens up herself, her life, her heart to resurrection love? She's in the garden weeping. She hears her name being called. It's a beautiful moment. It's a poignant moment. And in response to her name being called, she turns. That word turns appears twice in the story. She turns and she opens herself widely to the experience of resurrection love. It's a story that reminds us, does it not? It reminds us so powerfully, so deeply, that at the heart of this universe, there is a resurrection love. There is a resurrection love that knows each one of us deeply and intimately, that knows our own history of tears. That at the heart of this universe there is a resurrection love that has poured itself out for us on our behalf. That at the heart of this universe there is a resurrection love that has absorbed deeply into itself these dark powers of death and evil, and overcome them. That at the heart of this universe, there is a resurrection love that seeks us out in our tears and calls us by name. The wonderful emphasis of Ignatius, and this emphasis is particularly found in his last exercise he gives us on the contemplation on the love of God. The particular emphasis of Ignatius is that this resurrection love is coming to us in every experience, in every encounter, and in every event of our lives. That it can be found in all things. It comes to us in the mercies given to us in the dawning of each new day. That each new day we wake up to a day that we have not created but has been given to us, to the miracle and the mystery of our own existence. This resurrection love comes to us in the warmth of a coffee cup pressed against our cheeks first thing in the morning. That this resurrection love comes to us in the loyal affection of our dog. That this resurrection love comes to us in the stillness of a silent moment, in the peace of a beautiful music, in the words of a song. It comes to us in the helpful gestures of a team member, of a friend, of a colleague. That this resurrection love sometimes comes to us even through the members of our own family. I remember when my mom died, 2004. When your mother dies, the ground beneath your feet begins to shift. And I was at the airport on my way to see her when I heard that she had died, and my sister was telling me that as she died, she was asking for me and I wasn't there. And I remember arriving and going to a funeral. I remember after the funeral going outside, standing outside the funeral home, leaning over the railings, looking into the beauty of the garden. And as I stood there alone, I remember my 18-year-old son, Mark. He came across and he just knelt over the rail with me. Didn't say a word. And for 5-6 minutes, he just stood there with me, quietly and silently, and then just one sentence. Dad, this is really shit. And in that moment, resurrection love touched me. What I like about Ignatius so much is that he helps us to recognize these moments of consolation in our lives so practically and in such a down-to-earth way. He invites us to pay attention to those movements within our own life, those movements of consolation that stir up fresh faith and hope and love. To recognize those movements within us when we come alive again and when we find fresh energy for life. Those movements within us that move us towards a deep, deep joy and a peace that really goes beyond understanding. Those moments within us, those movements within us when we feel the increase of the fruit of the Spirit. And we know that we're not responsible for that deepening of that fruit of the Spirit. I find it so helpful at the end of each day just to look back and to recognize moments of consolation, of resurrection love, that in each day we encounter the Christ who seeks to console us, if only we would recognize him. And then lastly, we encounter the Christ who consoles us as we begin to participate in that ministry of consolation ourselves. As we begin to wipe away the tears of those around about us. And go back to the story of Mary. When Christ comes to her, she wants to hold on to him and never let go of him again. And he says to her, do not cling to me. Don't cling to me. Go to my friends, my disciples. Go to those who are still living in the dark shadow of Good Friday. Go to them and share with them the good news of resurrection love, that I am risen. And so too, as we encounter the Christ who consoles us, so we are invited into the ministry of consolation. That the focus shifts a little bit from our own tears to the tears of those around about us. And Ignatius would want this to happen. One of his favorite phrases, you will know this from listening to the talks on his life, to help souls. That somehow, if our journey through the exercises has not resulted in a deeper sensitivity to the pain of those around about us, something has gone wrong. And again, the wonderful, wonderful good news is that as we seek to be with others in their tears, Christ himself comes to us again. Some years ago, the church in which I served, we developed a ministry amongst those who were profoundly, profoundly disabled, mentally and physically. One Saturday afternoon each month, we would gather together with those who were disabled, together with their parents and family. And I made a commitment, I think it must have been for 3-4 years, to befriend Gavin. Gavin was 16, 17 years of age. He couldn't speak, could only make these guttural sounds from deep within him, and I felt sounds of anguish. He struggled to move. His own sister was also profoundly disabled, Megan. And over time I discovered that he loved to have his back scratched. We couldn't have a conversation, we couldn't play a game, but I could scratch his back. I found these times unsettling and awkward and difficult. It was almost as if his own presence revealed the poverty of my own capacity to be with someone in pain. But over the years, our friendship grew and developed. He started coming to church. One Sunday night I will never, ever forget. I'm speaking. He tried to get out of his chair, came down the aisle with difficulty, and then just put his arm around my shoulders. And in that moment, Christ happened for me again. The resurrected one, resurrection love. That's what happens. That as we put our lives alongside those in pain, and as we begin to participate in the ministry of the wiping away of tears, resurrection love surprises us again and again and again. So let me bring all this to a close. We've been on a journey together through the 4 weeks, the 4 movements, the 4 phases of the spiritual exercises. In the first week, we encountered the merciful Christ who forgives us. The second week, we encountered the Christ who calls us and invites us into transforming friendship. In the third week, we encountered the Christ who gives himself to us. In this 4th week, we encountered the Christ who consoles us. My deep hope and prayer is that somehow, this encounter has happened for you. That we may always remember, that insight about Christ, it's the consolation prize. Encounter with Christ is first prize. And I hope that we will know something of that first prize before we die.
I think for St. Ignatius, consolation being the main ministry of Christ is very deeply experienced by him, that when he experiences the presence of God, he always calls that consolation, and it fills him with joy. A number of times in his life, he recounts that he would have an experience of God and he'd be filled with joy and delight and even become quite tearful. And so I think for Ignatius, the risen Christ can only be someone who is a giver of great consolation because it's so deeply rooted in his own experience.
I think that Ignatius's emphasis that consolation was the main ministry of the risen Christ is just so evident in all of the resurrection texts. you see how he comes to each one of his friends, his disciples, and he offers them the gift of peace, the gift of healing, the gift of comfort. I think that it pervades every single one of those stories in different ways.
Ignatius emphasizes consolation as the main ministry of the risen Christ, because I think he had immersed himself in the resurrection narratives. In every resurrection story, Christ is bringing consolation to someone who's in a very negative space.
To speak very personally, the take and receive prayer is one that I find quite difficult in my times of doing the exercises and even praying it, because I realize just how much I am offering to God my whole self, my liberty, my memory, my understanding, my will. And I find that quite scary, because I sometimes wonder if I'm so attached to things within myself and around me, if I really do have the freedom to give all to God. And so often, to be honest, when I pray that prayer, I kind of pray that prayer saying, God, give me the desire to give you all, because I'm not quite sure that I'm there yet. And yet on the other hand, it's a very profound prayer, which I think has motivated me, has inspired me, and has continually drawn me to go back to Christ, to say, give me the strength to do what the prayer says.
I would say the take and receive prayer is probably my favorite prayer. It's the one that I pray each day. It's something that invites to a deep surrender. It's a prayer for me of profound trust. So it lands for me very deeply. But I think it's not an easy prayer to pray. It's one that one is constantly praying, or I am constantly praying for the grace to pray it more deeply and more authentically as I journey through my life.
The take and receive prayer, I don't think I've ever been able to pray it, as it were, 100%. It offers me a vision of self-offering. And that vision doesn't depress me, it doesn't oppress me, but it evokes desire. I would love to be able to pray that prayer with all of myself. And I ask for the grace almost each day to be able to pray that prayer and really mean it. One of the things I love about that icon of Christ and his friend is that they are not looking into each other's eyes, that they are looking together outward in the same direction. And I think that a very simple breath prayer, Lord, help me to see what you see here, I think may open up our awareness more deeply and more widely to what is in front of us.